We're on. So, welcome everyone to Irreverent Skeptics, where irreverence and skepticism does the nasty. I'm John Obi, and with us today is Mike Bowler,
Hello, everyone.
Michael McElroy,
Howdy, folks.
Erno Marthia. Is that how you pronounce your last name? I should really work on that.
Close enough.
Carlton George. I'm taking that as a hello. That or something obscene.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I was muted because they muted me before. This is all I got for Christmas. Let's try take two. Okay.
We're going to come back to that because I want to know what that is. Also with us is Dumbass.
Hey.
and Brandy Madison.
Hello.
So today's topic is secular morality. I guess I would define that as morals without a religious foundation. I want to talk a little bit about what that is and also how we come to those morals if in fact there is... What is that? Oh, sorry. And now I've got big blank space. If how we come to those if in fact there is no religious foundation, there's no God that tells us what right and wrong is. So... Carlton said he has lots of talking points he wanted to get out this week. So Carlton, hit us up with something. You had some knowledge for us.
I do? Well, no, I don't. I just wanted to talk. That's not necessarily the same thing as having knowledge. No, I don't know. Morals is an interesting. It's always been an interesting question for me. Does morals, not only do we need an objective source for morals to be true, but what about morals toward things other than human beings? Do we have a moral obligation for how we treat animals? Do we have a moral obligation for how we live in the world and consume resources? And if we only have a moral obligation toward people, what is it about people that makes us special or makes us unique or puts us in that moral universe, so to speak? So I actually have a lot more questions that I think that I have answers.
Fair enough. I would say the thing different about people is they can complain better than animals or the planet.
Oh no,
More
man.
immediately.
I don't know, man. I've had pets. Upset with you. They'll let you know. Yeah.
This is true. My joke falls flat. So I was just talking to a friend of mine this morning. I was playing Grand Theft Auto, a very moral game.
Very much.
And was talking about the topic of the podcast today, and he was asking, what is that exactly? And so that's how I explained it to him, kind of how I did at the beginning of the recording here, was that basically what morals does one have without having some kind of foundation that's based on religion? And I told him about how there's someone I've spoken to in the not too distant past that firmly believes that without a God, there can be no morals, because we would have no sense of what's right or wrong. And the easy conclusion to draw there is like, oh, so if you don't have some punishment for doing wrong, then you won't do right. And that's what my friend just asked me today, and I said, well, that's the easy conclusion to come to, but I don't think necessarily that's what my other friend would have said explicitly. Perhaps that's what he means, but maybe it's just something like some kind of inspiration for an idea for what is the correct course or not. So, anyone with thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got.
Go for it, Mike.
So I've done a lot of thinking about this subject, and I've watched a whole bunch of different videos with people talking about their opinions of it. And what I've come to conclude is that when we're talking about morality, I think that secular people and religious people are talking about two different things. There's a video that kind of sums up what I'm saying. It's Interview an Atheist in Church Day in Jackson, Mississippi. It's a guy named Neil Carter went into a church and talked to them about what it means to be an atheist and how he thinks about raising children and morality and things like that. And he mentions that he raises his kids with the idea that he should be teaching them how to figure out whether something is right or wrong. And when the question and answer session comes up at the end, one of the people in the audience mentions that he thinks that that's dangerous because children should be learning to obey. And it made me realize that in a lot of religious people's minds, morality is about obedience to the will of God. It's about doing what God says is right or wrong, or that somehow that morality comes from the nature of God, and I don't know how you determine what's right or wrong if you can't know what God's nature is. But anyway, so for secular people, obviously morality has to do with figuring out the repercussions of your actions, and it can't be based on some transcendent source of morality because we don't believe that exists. So morality as a subject has to do with what conscious thinking living creatures do and how we interact with each other, because there really isn't much else to base it on, because if you don't have consciousness, moral obligations and duties don't make any sense. Like a rock doesn't have moral obligations to a river. It only makes sense to talk about morality when you're talking about things that are alive and conscious.
Do we raise our hand? I don't know what we do today. Okay.
Yeah, it's fine. Go for it, Carlton.
Well, and that's one of the questions that I brought up, Michael, and I'd be interested in your reading. I mean, when we talk about, do we have a moral obligation as human beings to how we treat animals? In other words, if I go out there and catch a raccoon and torture it, put it on a spit, and extend its misery for a while before I let it die, is that in any sense then a moral act if the raccoon doesn't have a consciousness?
See, I think the
Excuse me.
the question is a little strange because moral obligation, it's a heavy, kind of a heady subject, because we're talking about whether we have an obligation to the raccoon or to the universe at large. I think when I don't know. I mean, we have different standards. I think people just by their actions have different standards of morality based on who it is that they're interacting with. I think that a lot of people would think that abusing animals is immoral, but it's not. As a secular person, it's not like I can say the universe is going to punish you for doing this. Obviously, there's the only people who can enforce the moral obligations are other conscious beings. So if we don't enforce the obligation, then the person can get away with it, which is something I've learned that a lot of religious people try to argue that there must be a God because otherwise people won't necessarily face punishment or reward for their actions. And it's like, yeah.
Sorry, this feels funny. No, I got one comment on that side, on the animal side, but I've got another comment that sort of relates to it. When we talk about being conscious, and again, I know a lot of this comes down to a definition of terms, which sometimes is very difficult. But you could argue that an infant is not conscious. You could argue that a person sleeping is not conscious. You could argue that somebody with advanced Alzheimer's or some other neurological or mental disease has lost the capability for rational thought or rational judgment.
Right.
So if that happens, are they then outside of our obligation to treat them morally?
See, and that's part of the reason why consciousness alone isn't a good enough standard. I think that we, just by our nature, because of the way we evolved, we feel a sense of obligation to other members of our species, no matter what state they're in. So.
Brandy had her hand up.
Excuse me, I keep clearing my throat. Maybe the better standard would be beings at capacity for suffering, rather than saying whether or not it's a conscious being. Raccoon, for instance, we know it can suffer. Nervous system, it can express distress. So that's my standard anyway, is this thing I'm considering able to suffer.
Well, okay, and I hate to do the infinite regress here, but then what is suffering? How do we define suffering? Because like you said, I could maybe stretch it to the raccoon, but how do you stretch it really to the river or to the environment being in distress? At what point is or are not those things really suffering?
Well, we can definitely say whether or not something has a detrimental effect. So, for instance, if you're dumping toxins into the river, then it is suffering, not from the the standpoint that it feels some physical sensation, but that it is worse off for having experienced toxins. It's a consequentialist kind of view, I guess. The consequences of our actions matter.
Yeah. But I guess, I mean, if we're talking about how our behaviors affect our environment, a lot of the time what people are really thinking about is how our behaviors will affect how we'll be able to use and live in the environment in the future. So.
Yeah, I think with the environment, it's usually the damage that it causes to the creatures that live in that environment, since the planet obviously doesn't have anything to sense pain, but the creatures do. If you pollute the waters, you're going to kill a lot of animals.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking that it's really a kind of thing that you need to you need to like think about for yourself and worry about it for yourself. Going back to the atheist in the church, talking about the guy who said that it's all about obedience. You need to be teaching the kids obedience, and of course you need to like when they're a kid, you can't tell them to think to reason all this stuff out. You tell them that's wrong, don't do it. But you also want to tell them why it's wrong and help them to figure out for themselves why things are wrong or not, and have that conversation. Because I think when you reduce morality down to absolutes and put it into things get distorted, and there are a lot of questions that you just don't want to deal with, and that makes it a lot easier. But the truth is that morality and what's the right action to take is a really messy thing to think about a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And that was something I object to a lot, is when I hear people say, how can you figure out what's right or wrong? The fact that the question is difficult doesn't mean we can't deal with it.
Mm-hmm. It's worth doing still, even if it's difficult.
I saw, I was reading an article this morning, as a matter of fact, and somebody made it was an interesting point, and they said that they didn't believe that we had an obligation, for example, to animals to be moral. That if you put your dog up on a spit and and peel a skin off, that was neither moral nor immoral. It was amoral. There was no moral context associated with it. Directly, and this is where they got interesting. They said, but we have an indirect moral obligation to animals. And they said the indirect moral obligation that we have is that as we behave poorly toward animals, that changes or diminishes our capacity to behave well toward other human beings. So that it's sort of a trait that we have, and to the extent that we do not care for that trait and how we express that trait at all times, it affects us. So if we treat animals badly, it's not that we've done something immoral to the animals, but it's that we have sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? We've acclimatized ourselves to behaving that way, and so we will then tend to behave that way toward other humans where there is a moral implication.
Yeah, with a lot of the domesticated animals, we have co-evolution, and we can read their emotions. So basically, with a dog, you can see if it is in pain, because that's something we can do, because most of us have had dogs, have seen dogs, and have basically 10,000 years of history with dogs. So animals that remind us by their actions of us are more likely to be considered as something that we have to be moral to. Unlike, let's say, ants that we just squish, and bacteria that we kill with antibiotics and everything. So there is something with that.
Well, I think... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I would be curious where someone that has that view would say they derive their morals or their sense of morals in how they treat other people. Then if treating animals in any given way is only has an effect somewhat on how you treat other people, and how you treat people is the only thing that apparently by that view is important. I would wonder, well, how would this person justify the need to treat other people with kindness, or how does that moral base start? Because it certainly isn't something like myself. I tend to take the view of all life being precious, and not causing any suffering for any life is important, in my opinion. That's just opinion, but that that starts with the basis of all life is important. And I don't know. They're just hearing that idea. There's something about that just strikes me as very, very wrong. And of course, not to say that that's wrong entirely, and that there's no argument to be made against that. It strikes me very, very, I don't know, very.
So I have a couple of thoughts about that. The first is that it seems like, just from the way people actually behave, that our moral behavior tends to take a more serious note when we're dealing with things that are more human, or that are more things that we deal with on a more usual basis. Like when we talk about, like, people get a sort of gut negative reaction to hearing about pets or farm animals being abused. But you hear about, I mean, look how many people just run over a squirrel on the road and don't care about it. I mean, it's sort of this the pet or property versus pests or whatever split that we have there. The other thing that I was thinking is, I think people, by and large, even people who talk about, valuing all life, and I'm sure you probably do value all life strongly, but the thing is that most people make moral determinations based on, whether the amount of suffering that they have to go through, or the decisions they make outweigh the sense of moral obligation that they feel towards animals. Like, whenever I buy a hamburger, I know that there are cows that are out there being mistreated, and somewhere in the back of my mind that's sitting there floating around, but at the time I want some beef. So
I a couple good points there, Michael. I think part of this is that, and I don't think we've actually said it, but it's sort of, I feel this sort of implicit understanding around the edges. I don't think there's anything immoral about killing another animal. And so, at least for me, so I want to be clear, I think there's a line between killing something and torturing something, or intentionally causing something pain for the sake of simply causing it pain. So even like with your hamburger, even though you could argue, like you said, that when you eat that hamburger, you are aware that there are cows or thousands of cows out there suffering. You could almost argue that shouldn't be on your shoulders. In other words, because you're eating a hamburger, yes, that means that we have to kill cows for meat. But that does not imply that we have to treat the cows poorly or torture them or make them suffer to get them to that end. So I think that's on the shoulders of the person that's raising the cows. Right. I'm certain that you could take good care of the cows right up until the time you put a bullet in their head. But you know what I'm saying. But in doing that, I mean, you're not torturing them. It's not like the cow is in that line, fretting and worrying for 15 minutes because he knows this is the end and he's getting ready to be shot. Yeah. He's there 1 minute and he's gone the next. There's no suffering involved per se, so I don't know that that's wrong. And then the other two, real quickly, is I think when we talk about a religious view, one of the things that strikes me is when we talk about a biblical view, if you will, of morals, it seems that there are two problems, and it seems like no matter which way you go, you still have these two problems. And then the two problems are this: if you have rules or moral commandments that we have to follow, if they are specific enough to cover every situation, okay, you're going to have an innumerable number of laws that you would need to create. I mean, it would be virtually impossible to write a moral law for every given situation. Okay, and the other side to that coin is, as soon as you generalize them enough to cover all the possible situations that it could relate to, it becomes so vague that it really isn't a moral mandate at all, because everybody's going to interpret that mandate differently, because it is it has to be so general and so open-ended. So I don't understand from the religious person standpoint. They say there's objective morals, but if you actually ask them for a list of all of them, I'm not sure that you could get anything meaningful.
Yeah, what you said there kind of reminded me, when you're talking about the beef. It reminded me of I kind of had this conversation with the amateur skeptics that about how far does your moral involvement go when things are out of your hand? And that's an interesting question. And for myself, like there's a question of if you're shopping at a place, are you supporting the things they do with your money after you pay them? Whether they do something that you don't approve of. And my general thought on that is that once the money leaves your hand, you have no obligation towards what happens to it. Any shopkeeper you give it to could turn around and give that money to NAMBLA for all you know. So it's like you can't really expect to follow the dollars and make sure that everything you put your money to goes exactly where you want it to. And I kind of don't really like when companies try to tell you what they're doing with their money. Even for something I approve of, like, oh, buy this and we'll donate a little bit to cancer. I'm like, well, if I'm buying a thing, I'm buying a thing. If I'm donating to cancer, I'm donating to cancer. I want the two to be separate.
Yeah, and I guess you can extend that argument to something like how you feel about what the government does and the fact that you're giving them tax money to do it. It's kind of, I think there's all sorts of moral obligation or moral implications to things that people are not considering just throughout the day, like the fact that you're voting to have a tax increase so that your schools will get paid for, and that means that the government is able to set aside more money that they would have spent on the schools to do something else, and maybe that money is going to help, I don't know, finance a new military base somewhere. And
Drones.
If you're a pacifist, how do you feel about that? So, and it just kind of doesn't come up. There's all sorts of things that are going on that people don't think about. Like, I can't remember who it was. There was an author who wrote a book about how if people really considered all of the moral implications of all the actions that they're taking, it would crush them. And basically the idea is, every time you go out to buy a cup of coffee and you're not spending that money to save some starving child somewhere, your cup of coffee is essentially leading to the death of children.
Peter Singer. Singer talks a lot like that. I don't know if that's the book, but he talks a lot about that. Pete Singer.
Well, and part of what you said, dumbass, is I'm not sure what the right way is to view it, and I think it has to do not so much with action, but more with knowledge. In other words, if I put my mother in a retirement home, and I go and I pick out a nice retirement home that seems to be fine, and I put her in there, and the aides mistreat her, then I'm not morally responsible for that. Obviously, the aides that are mistreating her are morally are acting immorally. But if I go to put her in a home and I know that home has a reputation for treating the people that are there badly, then I think I do share some of the culpability if she's treated poorly. And so to some extent, it kind of puts us in this awkward situation of saying, well, here's my money. I don't want to know where it's going. Kind of what you're saying, because ignorance is bliss. If I don't know, then I can spend my money, and I'm not culpable for whatever happens to it. Yeah, but if you tell me that when I buy this fan from your store that 10% goes to Al Qaeda, well, now I've got a moral obligation here probably to not buy that fan. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I actually had the same moral conundrum just yesterday or something. Yeah, with the Ender's Game, because Orson Scott Card is a really well-known bigot.
Raging homophobe.
Basically, yeah, a raging homophobe. So we actually decided not to see the movie just because of that, because we knew that the money might go, some part of that movie ticket that I buy might actually go towards like bigoting gays in the U.S. So
I don't believe the money goes directly towards Orson Scott Card.
He's going.
I think he's already being
kind
paid
of royalties.
My thoughts on Ender's Game, the movie and the book, is like, regardless of whether or not Orson Scott Card is a tool, I just didn't think it was that great of a novel anyway. So it was only okay.
Wah.
Yeah. So I want to change topics for a second, because
I remember it too.
Yeah, it wasn't terrible, but anyway, I don't want to go on at length about that. It's not even worth discussing, really. Michael had a blog post a while back about the weird moral situations in Grand Theft Auto 5, which, as I said earlier, I've been playing recently, so I wanted Michael's take on that.
Yeah, so I picked up Grand Theft Auto 5, and I thought it was a fantastic game, but I realized as I was playing it that I was making some very strange moral choices. There's some situations in the game that are just part of the plot, and you have to deal with them. And one of these is where you are torturing a guy to get information from him so that you
Spoilers.
can... Sorry, spoiler alert here. You're kind of being coerced into torturing this guy to help out the government so that they don't, like, snitch you to the CIA or whatever. And your character kind of gleefully goes about waterboarding him and kicking him in the nuts and electrocuting him and all this stuff. And I'm sitting here squirming in my seat because I'm directly involved with this stuff. It's like you actually have to press buttons to waterboard someone. And meanwhile, I'm in the middle of playing a game where I freely run around running people down, shooting them in the face. You know, I chase down a purse snatcher, kill him, and then keep the money for myself and don't feel anything about it. And so there's this weird disconnect between when you're kind of forced into doing something and when you just do it as a matter of course of the game. It's just something that happens. So.
It certainly causes a strange tension in that scene because I don't know, because you have to actually interact to do that. It gives you some odd sense of responsibility.
And they're not
Whereas,
even real
just
people.
like you said, like it's not real people. It's completely you can just say, oh, it's just some simulation of, and it's it's not real, but it does it. I was kind of squirming too, or I just thought this is really unnecessary.
Yeah, and I remember years ago there was a crusading lawyer who was all up in arms about the Grand Theft Auto games, and he called them murder simulators. And now this is literally a torture simulator.
Right? Arnold's got a point.
Yeah, I haven't played GTA 5, but Walking Dead makes you do shitty things too. Walking Dead, the video game. I mean, you basically every time you have to choose, you have two choices, and both are bad. Basically, you're always making a bad decision. That's basically a good decision.
Forcing you to save one person instead of the other, and then it alters the storyline later down. Yeah.
Yeah. And I found that occasionally pretty horrible, that you have to sacrifice children to the zombies, and basically you have to kill people to get like food items, because it's the end of the world, basically.
Well, if they're not pulling their weight, I'm just saying.
Well, so if I can, playing devil's advocate for a moment, does the religious right have a point? If these games, if they're causing you to squirm internally, then it would seem reasonable to think that they actually might be desensitizing you to actually doing the actual acts. Should you be in that position?
Well, I don't know.
Well, and so is there any validity then to the fear that you hear from the conservative or from the religious right that we shouldn't be playing these games, not because necessarily playing the game itself is immoral, but because of what we're forced to do in the games, that it does desensitize us, that what made us squirm the first few days when we played it and did this, we no longer squirm maybe after we do it for a while, and is that a negative effect that we should avoid?
Well, then these people should definitely discourage any children from reading the Bible.
Amen.
Drinking the blood of Christ.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't have any trouble making the distinction between digital and real. I mean, I think the fact that I am squirming says something about the fact that I still have a moral compass, which is good. But
well, yeah, it does. But if you, I mean, isn't it like anything else though? If you, it's like being afraid of snakes. If you have a reaction to snakes, one of the surest ways to get you past that is to keep exposing you to snakes. Maybe in smaller quantities, and keep increasing that until you get to the point where they no longer bother you. Is the same true about morality?
It might take a certain kind of person to want to do that scene over and over and over again.
I have a anecdotal take on that. I've been exposed to all kinds of things on the internet for well over a decade now. Right, Michael's nodding his head. You name it, I've probably seen it on the internet somewhere at some point. And I have friends in the past who for some reason love watching videos from like LiveLeak or occasionally on YouTube where something disastrous happens to someone, they get seriously injured or they get killed, or bad car wrecks, things like that. And even though I've seen those videos hundreds and hundreds of times, I have zero desire still to watch those. I still cringe every time I see. Oh yeah, fucked. Yeah, God. I cringe every time I see a video like that, and if I know something, if it's not a surprise click, then I just avoid it anymore because those aren't things that I want to see. Those aren't things I enjoy watching. I'm certainly not desensitized to it. In that I'm not desensitized to it in that I can just watch it and be like, oh yeah, this is fun. I like watching this. I will squirm a little bit, and I'm not. I would say I'm not sickened by. I'm not nauseated by some things that would certainly nauseate other people. And in that regard, I guess I'm desensitized. I could watch a gory video and be like, wow, that's disgusting, and that'll be about the totality of my reaction. But still, there's still part of me that's just like, no, I really don't want to watch that. I don't want to watch people getting hurt. I don't want to watch, disasters happening. So I don't know. And of course, like I said, that's anecdotal. That's not for everyone. So this isn't to say like because this is how it is for me, that video games or violent imagery can't desensitize someone else. I'm just saying for myself, it only has to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of desensitized to maybe images of gore and things like that, but it doesn't desensitize me to the human tragedy behind things that produce those images. I mean, it just I see it and I think, oh my God, this is something that could happen to me or somebody I love, and it's horrible, but it doesn't quite make me as ill anymore seeing them. I don't know.
I think there's a big difference between imaginary violence and real violence, and I think you can get desensitized to imaginary violence, but still freak out if you see real violence. I don't think it necessarily works that you see a lot of violence on TV and suddenly you're callous towards it in real life. I don't think it really works that way.
Possible.
Yeah.
Arno had a point to make.
Yeah. In the military, they use human-shaped targets basically to desensitize you from firing a gun towards human-like object, basically. So the theory behind that is that during World War II and I, people, well, most soldiers, like something like 90% of all soldiers, didn't shoot at the enemy. Yeah, they just fired randomly at the general direction of the enemy because they didn't want to hit something that is human, because they knew that what it would mean if you pull a trigger and you have an enemy in your crosshairs. So nowadays, most armies, at least including the Finnish army, they use human targets that keep popping up. Like they're on these little pedestals and they keep popping up, and you just have to shoot them in order to advance, basically to advance the course. So you're basically shooting something that's human-like, so you would get desensitized to.
Well, I would point out with that too. I would point out with that too that when you're going through these training exercises, you're actually mentally trying to psych yourself mentally up, train yourself to be able to shoot people. You're not just playing a game. You're trying to, get yourself in a state of mind where you can't shoot people. So that is training yourself kind of to be desensitized to real life shooting people.
Yeah, but what does it say about me that with a machine gun I got a score of 97 out of 100 hits on these human targets with a machine gun?
Sounds like you played a lot of Counter-Strike, sir.
Don't piss off Erno.
Stay on his good side.
I wonder, is there maybe a progressive scale to that? Because certainly sitting on my sofa in front of a television pulling a plastic trigger on a controller is a lot less involved than standing on a firing range with an actual weapon firing at a target. So could it be perhaps that both do have a desensitizing effect and one is far more effective than another? I don't know.
I think context has everything to do with it.
I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah,
I do remember back when the Columbine shooting happened and they were all trying to blame it on how the kids played Doom, and then it was a training them to shoot people, and it's nothing like it. You're moving a mouse and clicking a button or pushing a key on a keyboard. You're not pointing a gun. It's nothing.
Yeah, but in those old school arcades, they used to have the pistol things that you would shoot targets with, like actually point and shoot toy guns. I think those might have more of an effect, and I suppose gaming companies have been making the gun controllers for consoles more unlike guns, real guns. They're like plastic toy gunny things.
I don't know. I mean,
Brandy's got her hand up.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Brandy.
No, I'm listening.
I think there is. I mean, I think there is an escalation there. I think whether it crosses from fantasy to real life, I can't answer that. But certainly, I mean, if you look at Hollywood, if you look at zombie movies or horror movies or anything, like you said, where there's blood, guts, and whatever, I mean, you certainly can over the last 10, 20 years see an escalation in the type of content that satisfies the viewers. I definitely think there's an escalation there. So as you become desensitized to, just the psychological fear of some guy getting hit over the head and hear crunching noises, but you don't actually see something. Yeah, there certainly is a progression to, watching the alien rip out of somebody's stomach and, scurry around the room or what have you.
Yeah, there's definitely. I think you're right. There has been an escalation in not just quantitatively, but qualitatively, the kind of gore and violence that we are showing in popular media now. Because I think of movies from like the 50s, cowboy movies. They'd shoot somebody, and all you'd see is they'd like clutch their chest and fall backward.
Right.
And now you have on just network TV. Things like The Walking Dead, where people's heads are exploding or they're jabbing knives up into somebody's chin, and I mean, yes, they're zombies, but still, there are these human figures that are, and all of that's okay, all of that's perfectly fine, but God forbid a woman's nipple should show up on TV.
Yeah, Janet Jackson or otherwise.
That reminds me of a discussion I had one time. My sister has Walking Dead parties on the weekends, whenever it's playing. So there's a big group that shows up. There was an episode. There was an implied sexual assault in one of the scenes. It was kind of a torture scene, and my sister said something to the effect of like, "That's just stepping over the line." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And she said, "Yeah, that's just that they shouldn't show that on TV. Like, there's kids here." Which there was a point to be made about why there were little kids there watching that show. But I said, so murdering people, shooting one another, like thievery, all those things, those are okay. Foul language, that's okay. But an implied sexual assault, that's crossing the line. And I crossed the line by asking that question, apparently, because it started quite the argument. But I walked away from that. Well, I walked away from that thinking, like, that's very interesting how we on a societal level tend to just accept a lot of things. But yeah, like something like that, like, oh, that implied sexual assault was not okay. I agree, that's not okay. I don't know that I think it should or should not have been included in the show. But I think it's odd that's where the line was drawn. Or like you said, like we show a nipple on TV and people flip their shit about it. And I don't know. It's interesting to me that there's this weird line there of all the violence is okay, complete deceit and dishonesty is okay, but God forbid we show something of a sexual nature.
Yeah. I mean, you look at what South Park has done, where they had an episode where they had people in a human centipede shitting in each other's mouths repeatedly. That was on network TV. That was on basic cable, Comedy Central. But
South Park has done everything. They get away with everything because it's a cartoon.
Yeah. But that's actually one of my favorite episodes of South Park ever, so that tells something of me. But Walking Dead, the comic book, is actually really, really horrible if you compare it to the TV shows, like in the sense that the moral choices the characters make in the comics, they are even worse. I mean, the guys are horrible. It's just, oh my god, it's the worse than the best comic I've ever read. Worst in the moral sense that most of the characters that are killed off in the comics, they are actually shot by their friends or like lovers or oh my god, they have suicide pacts and
yeah, I think the author had some relationship issues.
Well, I got a question. So if if a theist asks me where I get my morals, right, and I'm not speaking for everybody here, but we're probably close. If I say I get to my morals through rational thought, consideration, how it affects society, those around me, what have you, and I say that as a result of that, I believe that randomly going out and killing an innocent person would be an immoral act. There are two ways, I guess, that idea or that moral could spread through society. Obviously, one is that I go out and I share my concerns with my neighbor and so forth and so on, and we convince each other over time that this is a wrong act, and we all end up, coming to accept that. The other way is, which might be more of the religious persons. The other way, though, might be that are we inborn? I was going to say inbred. That's not the right word. Are we? are we born? Are we born with that sensibility in us? In other words, even if we were to grow up on an island isolated from the ideas of others, would we still feel? Is there this innate moral sense that killing a random innocent person is a bad thing? And if so, couldn't you make an argument that implies some sort of an objective morality, not necessarily one from a god, but that there is a natural moral order to the universe that we all understand intuitively?
It's a...
So I'd say, according to, reading Dawkins, he seems to imply that it is we're hardwired for empathy, which I think drives our morals.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think even if two people were thrown on an island and let to go run their course, I think we would still have the same, we would still have these same moral values, even though we're totally disconnected from any type of book or anything like that. So I think I personally think that it's probably more emotional. Our emotional drives dictates our morals. It's. I see empathy as being very important. So that's why we decide whether or not to torture that dog, or we try to, when we look at what's on TV, what our moral compass is driving, or that internal compass, that emotional compass, driving us to our how we act outside.
I think there's a point here that we are social creatures, so how we interact with other people is by nature. So by that logic, then there is something innate in us, I think, that wants to do right by others.
Yeah, I think that it's a multi-layered issue, because we do have, I think, a lot of the moral tendencies that most people exhibit are sort of instinctual. There's something that have been bred into us through our evolution as a social species, living in these little clans and families, bands, whatever. And a lot of it is cultural. So, people talk about how there are cultural moral beliefs that we share all throughout the world, but look throughout history and you'll see people disagreeing about very basic stuff, like the whole idea of, I guess, I don't know how true the movie 300 was, but there was the whole scene with them throwing twisted and disfigured babies off a cliff, and nowadays that's the sort of thing we would find kind of objectionable. But I think of the desert island scenario that constantly gets brought up. People think of the book Lord of the Flies, and that book was sort of written as a Christian moral lesson about how humans have a depraved nature, and that this is what happens if you leave them to their own devices without a culture to drive them in the right direction.
So Tom and/or Cecil from Cognitive Dissonance joined us just now.
It's just Cecil. It's not
What's up,
Tom.
Cecil?
Tom, of
Hello.
course. You fucking think Tom's gonna join you guys? Are you serious?
I didn't think so, but
He's sitting
it was
somewhere
the-
right now in his fucking underwear. That's what he's doing.
it was the appropriate thing to say.
Yeah.
More hacking, I promise.
Wait, what?
What?
Nice shirt, man.
What?
That's a fucking awesome shirt there.
If I'd have known you were going to be here, I'd have had my glory hole prop up again. So.
Prop. I like prop. Yeah.
Did you actually
You
get
gotta
to see
tell
that? That was
buddy.
nice, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was
Prop
awesome,
wall.
man. It was great. It was great.
We,
Although it wasn't
we
a real
debated.
hole.
We debated getting an actual like big black donger and hit me on the head with it through the hole during the deal.
That would have been outstanding. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Doing good.
So,
Doing good.
so I wanted to mention real quick that 300 is absolutely 100% historically accurate.
Oh yeah.
Documentary.
They all strode
And it's
around
also
half naked
100%
and
shit.
I don't understand why it's not shown on the History Channel.
considering everything else they have on there, like the fucking
Right? Like,
Yeah,
I'm
well,
pretty
it's got
sure all
everything.
movies
It's
are
got everything from
100%
history.
accurate, right? They're all documentaries, aren't they?
yeah. Hey, it's Dumbass. Holy shit. How's it going,
Hey.
Dumbass? What's up, man?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
Good, man. Can't complain.
This is like becoming the celebrity hangout here.
I'm
I'll
not a
just
celebrity.
slide away.
We need a single celebrity for that to happen, I think.
Yeah.
Celebra woman.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
All right. So
Where do you
wait,
get your morals from? From where do you derive your secular morality? That's the question.
From empathy. That's where everybody gets their morals from. It's from being. Somebody just mentioned that empathy is hardwired, and I think that's 100% correct. I mean, I've read a bunch of stuff about how humans evolved. In evolution, we rely on each other. We're a social species, so it makes sense to help each other out and to be empathetic. And I think that just makes. I mean, it just makes sense. When people say, "Where do you get your empathy from?" You certainly wouldn't get it from a god. I mean, that's Dawkins.
Well, Jeebus, obviously.
Yeah, you wouldn't get it from. You wouldn't. Well, Jeebus maybe, I guess, if you read. Although I've never really read most of the Bible, but Jesus maybe some of it I've read it, but no, I think that if you look at the Old Testament specifically, you wouldn't be able to get any morality out of there.
Yeah, it's good for a chuckle.
well, what about when you talk about empathy, but doesn't selfishness still underline empathy? In other words, we're empathetic or we're cooperative, but only to the extent that it benefits us. And so the question then becomes: is selfishness moral, immoral, or amoral? Where does selfishness fit into the whole scheme of things?
I think selfishness. Am I allowed to answer this, or is this like a panel?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. If you're talking about selfishness, I think selfishness, malicious selfishness, where it hurts another person, would the rest of the group, the rest of the social structure, that's the part that would be the one that would look down on you and that would ostracize you for doing that. So it sort of selectively, I think, has made us more and more empathetic because and more I just think social creatures that I don't know that we want to help each other, but I think we benefit when we help each other.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that we would. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just
Mike.
going to say that's. I mean, in the Selfish Gene, Dawkins, he kind of goes through that and explains the that there are people going to be selfish, and the group will recognize that these are detrimental to I mean, it may not be obvious right off the bat that they are the selfishness is detrimental, but eventually, and when enough people become selfish, the group will then gang up and push out that and move back over. So it's it works.
Sorry, Mike. I didn't mean
Oh
to-
no, it's okay.
I was getting revved up there like a little Kawasaki. I think though that the problem I think that I have with that is that when I'll be the first to bring Hitler in since we're having the moral conversation. We have to bring him in. An atheist looks at that, and in light of a Christian saying, "How can you say Hitler is wrong?" And the atheist looks at that and they say, "Well, I can say he's wrong because I judge him based on my moral values, which are mine, and that doesn't necessarily imply that he has to think he was wrong in what he did." But isn't that exactly the same argument that we're now taking the other side on when we say that when we behave selfishly in such a way that society deems it inappropriate, that society pushes back on us, and the implication there is that then we should change our behavior because somebody else deems it immoral? It sounds almost like this exact same argument, except now we're on Hitler's side. And I think that there are two ways of being selfish that are two possibilities. I think you can be selfish to your own detriment, okay? And I think that's, you could easily show that to somebody via, reason or example. So if I'm going around shooting people randomly, it's not too big a stretch to be able to show somebody that, while it means there's less people on your street to compete for food at the 7-Eleven, that ultimately this is probably not a good scenario to follow, because somebody else is going to get the same idea and you're going to be the next one on the list to get shot. I mean, that's one side of selfishness, but I think there's another side, though, that's more difficult to address, and that is, what if I say that I'm going to take some action that benefits me? I mean, it truly benefits me, but it's detrimental to somebody else, but not in a way that's going to come back to haunt me, so to speak. How do we deal with that? I guess there was a couple questions in there, so wherever you want to go.
Don't we see that every day in the business life? Basically, let's say a CEO kicking out 200 workers who may or may not have any safety nets to fall on. Don't we see that? No one is ever going to blame the CEO if someone offs themselves, if one of the kicked out employees offs themselves. Right.
Yeah. Obviously, never met my father.
Well, the other side to that, though, the other side to that too is I think risk and reward have to go in there. So even if I'm going to be selfish, and even if I realize that this is probably not a good strategy long term for society, I might be willing to take the risk. Okay. So how do you convince me that is now an immoral behavior? I mean, where does risk and reward fit into our decisions as to whether we act selfishly or cooperatively?
So I think there's kind of a couple different issues going on here, and I mean, one of them is that the whole moral consensus idea that basically the way we work, the way we have worked, just historically in the past, is that we form societies based on people who share values, and we will put some sort of shunning or what's the word I'm thinking of? We'll
social ostracizing.
Yes, we'll have some sort of punishment or outcasting mechanism for people who violate our values. And I can hear you chewing, and it's very distracting. But yeah, I mean, it's just the fact of how humans have operated is we work together to decide what we're going to accept. And I think part of this conversation is kind of a moot point, because we have this idea that if we're going to talk about morality, there's going to be people who say, well, that's not a good enough moral system because it doesn't solve all of our problems. And I think that any moral system worth its salt is going to be incomplete just because you can't have something perfect that's going to make everybody happy. Because like you said, how do you make somebody care that he's being shunned for being selfish if he doesn't care what other people think of his behavior? I mean, if your moral system can't solve that, that doesn't mean it's not worth having, I think.
And silence.
Well, the question of how the social behavior of people in a society. I mean, of course, that's a big force for good too. But also in like really secluded religious communities where they want to handle everything themselves and don't want to report rape and things like that. That's an example of when it can go wrong. So there is no absolute answer to what kind of values you should have and what kind of society can enforce those. But it is a big discussion that you have to try to figure out for yourself where to put a balance in.
Well, I think that, I think there's another thing too to what Mike said. I think there's two issues there, and one of them is civil law or societal law, right? What we allow as a group. But I think the morals themselves, I don't think are a societal property. I think they are an individual property only. And so at some point, you might say that, if all of society thinks that we should behave this way, yes, they can enact some sort of civil laws or punishment for those that don't, for the outliers, but I'm not sure that they have a moral right to force another individual to behave differently than what his own personal moral dictates demand of him. Did that come out right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if morality is inherently a personal thing, then does it even make sense to say that you don't have a moral right to restrict someone's? I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the question. And I'm sorry for it sounding sort of convoluted here, like we're looking in 1,000 mirrors. But
no worries.
If morals are a personal way of looking at the world and our behavior.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
I'm not sure how to phrase the question. So
it's just the way that we do work. I mean, whether it's the best way to work or not, the way we do work is that we impose some sort of societal sanction on people whose behavior we find unacceptable. So, I mean, if that itself is immoral, I don't know. I mean, that's a much tougher question that I haven't really spent a lot
as far
of
as
time thinking about.
as far as we consider moral choices, we don't really count anything as immoral that's basically off to like a few steps away from you. If you pollute a river and kill 5,000 people in 10 years' time, no one's going to pretty much think you're immoral. Well, they might, but it's 10 years later and you've already made your choices. But as far as like straight up actions go, we probably can easily determine if an action is moral or immoral. If it's like an immediate, like pushing someone under a truck, we can probably tell that that's immoral.
Well, I think that, yeah, and I think the other problem that religion has is that when you talk about absolute morals or actions that are always right or always wrong, I mean, I don't think any human philosophers anyway that have come up with the moral systems, I don't think any of them would say that the system is always right or always wrong in any given situation. I think that morals are a guideline for behavior, and that there should be justification for when we deviate from a moral guideline, but that it's not immoral to deviate.
Wow.
I think if there's justification to deviate, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, as a counterpoint to that, I spent a little while as a fundie, and I know people who were other fundies who said that if you deviate from the Bible's morality, you have sinned, no matter what. There is no justification for it. So, I mean, you talk about situations that the common situation that's brought up is, would you, if you were a German in Germany during World War II, would you lie to the Nazis that they're about Jews hiding in your house? And I know people who said, oh no, I definitely wouldn't do that because lying is a sin. So it's very simple and not too critical moral calculus going on there.
Hey John, you run the show. You don't have to raise your hand.
Yeah, we got a question on the Q&A. S. Ross asked, empathy, doesn't cultural standard lead toward national empathy, yet, quote, natural innate empathy, unquote, lead to unbalanced empathy like today's PC frequent preferences of many to care for animals over people, such as in the case of floods, etc. I don't really, I'm not aware of many cases where people care about animals over people. I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that question.
I would probably save my dog over most people I don't know. Just saying.
I don't know if this was meant in case by case context though, where I'm guessing what they mean here is that there's a trend towards people caring more about the welfare of animals over the welfare of people. I don't see that myself happening, at least not frequently. If it does, I don't know. Any other thoughts?
Well, there are a few laws in Finland that actually do bad things to people. Basically, they cause economic troubles for farmers, like keeping wolves, a certain amount of wolf, a minimum number of wolves. We have to have at least 250 wolves, and they
per person?
No. Per country.
Like in your house, in a box,
but is that,
in your car?
But is that putting, I would ask, is that putting the welfare of animals over the welfare of people by saying, oh, we want to care somewhat for the welfare of these animals.
Well, in the sense that, I mean, we do in the United States, we have laws that if you torture an animal, even if it's a wild animal, you can be imprisoned for that. Isn't that the same thing?
Well, is that saying that? But you would have the same punishments for torturing a person as well, and probably I think we can say you would have far harsher punishment for torturing a person than for torturing an animal.
Well, yeah, no, but I don't mean that in that sense. I mean that you're incarcerating the person who tortured the animal. In other words, you are basically saying that animal had sufficient value to put the person in prison, a human being in prison for that.
So the welfare of that animal trumps the welfare of the person that tortured that animal.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I myself, I'm okay with that distinction, but yeah, I don't know that I could say that's necessarily right or wrong in a larger context. For me personally, I would say I'm okay with that, but yeah, that's an interesting point.
Torturing animals in Finland is basically a crime that nets you like a ticket, something akin to, let's say, 500 euros worth of money lost. So, and torturing a person probably nets you something like 4 years in prison. So,
I want to say something about sending rednecks to your country then, to offend many people.
So,
I'm going to call that answered.
Okay.
That's the only Q&A question we have so far.
Really? No other good Q&A questions, huh?
I guess we just know everything and explained it very well.
Something like that, sure.
That works.
Yeah, that's it.
We really have only scratched like biblical morality, since I think it's the prevalent moral system in our culture. So what's wrong with that? It obviously is a good moral system, right?
I know that when I found out that my girlfriend was a virgin, or not a virgin, I took her out to the edge of town and stoned her with the whole village. So, that's how that works.
No.
That sounds appropriate, right?
You're supposed to do. You're supposed to tell her parents, and her parents are supposed to.
Oh, right.
You did it all wrong.
My bad.
God damn it.
And when my neighbor stole my ox, I had him give me another ox and pay me 50 shekels or something. I don't know what that rule is. It's fucking stupid.
It's only 30 shekels.
You don't even want to know how
it's only 30 shekels for like raping someone's daughter, if I recall correctly.
Well,
that's a fucking deal.
Paying the iron price.
Well, now, if I can make all you guys play devil's advocate here, what is if there was hypothetically a set of moral values that derived from some god or gods, how would that change anything? What would change specifically? How would that be utilized to be any different than the system that we have now?
I think that people who were believers would continue to ignore by and large the rules that the God gave them.
Right.
When you ask that, do you mean like irrefutable proof? Like
no.
So we have some laws given by a God, and there's irrefutable proof. Like we know for a fact that. I mean, hypothetically, we knew for a fact.
We're assuming, yeah, for the sake of argument.
Well, that's something that already happens, I would say.
Right, but what I'm saying is, how would it change? How would it change anything? What I'm driving at is that the Christians always say that without an objective source for our morality, that whatever morality that we come up with has no basis, is useless, is, I don't know what word you want to use for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
but what I'm saying is, but that doesn't seem to be the case, okay? Mm-hmm. How does the fact that God gives this morality change that? How does that add any value? It seems to me, I'll prime the pump here, it seems to me that takes away any value that a moral judgment might have. If it's not something that I come to through my own understanding, how does getting it from some outside source, regardless of how powerful he is, how does that improve that moral value?
I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because you think about getting morals from God. So did God just get out a pad of paper and a pencil and spitball these down? I think that would be good, and put all these in. Or are these some things that existed that exist that God is just recognizing? So do they exist outside of God then? if you think about it that way? How did God come up with them, or if so, he's just imposing what he thinks would be best on everybody, or if they exist outside of them, outside of them, how does that work?
Well, the solution that I've heard from religious people, from Christians especially a lot, is that goodness is derived from the nature of God, which kind of it doesn't really solve the problem so much as restate it, so that now is God capable of changing his nature, or what decided the nature of God? So if is morality something that came from outside of God, or is it just something that is a brute fact about the nature of God, which God had no decision over, and therefore if we can determine the nature of God, then we no longer need him to tell us what's right and wrong? But I mean, there's another issue here, which is something that was brought up on the Reasonable Doubts podcast quite a while ago, talking about this problem, and like morality means a different thing to humans than it does to God, even in like the Christian system, because you look at the things God says are moral and immoral for humans, and it's not even just a matter of like God is perfect in those to a perfect degree, because like he tells us not to murder people, and he wipes out the whole fucking planet.
So he tells some of us to murder people, though.
But
in the past.
Or he told his people to wipe out entire tribes and villages and whatever. So clearly, what good is to God means something entirely different than what good means to us. Because if he was just perfectly good by the standard he gives us, that would mean he couldn't kill people. He couldn't be ordering people to kill people. I mean, all the things that it means that we have no way of knowing what true morality is, because true morality would be the morality that God uses to say what's good and bad. And if that's supposed to be his nature, how do we get access to that? Even if there is a God and we know absolutely for sure that he's the source of morality, we have no access to that. We can't make moral decisions. We're kind of have our legs cut out from under us.
I would say it's important to point out that the morals that, I'm going to say Christians because that's the religion I'm most familiar with in practice, the morals that Christians cherry pick out of their religious text mostly mirror the morals that secularists display. There are some differences, like homophobic morality, if you will, is a little different than often what you'd see in secular morality. But the idea is that you don't steal, you don't kill, lying is bad, so on and so forth. Those kind of things we can come to on our own without needing to cherry pick it out of a book where rape is okay in some cases, murder is okay in some cases. In fact, it's required in some cases if your kids.
Now come on, y'all, just do as I say, not what I do.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, that's a good question though, because if you for those of us that had children, or those of us that can imagine it, I mean, is that not how we treat our children to some extent? Don't we say, don't do this, not because it's the thing itself is wrong, but because they don't have the capacity to know when it's right and when it's wrong. Whereas I might do that very thing that I told my child not to do, but it's because I understand the implications of what's surrounding it, and I understand the situation and when it's okay to do this and when it's not okay to do this. Couldn't you make the same argument for God?
Well, no.
Are you saying that you don't let your children be wasted all the time, taking just beers out of the fridge?
Excellent point.
You are an evil person.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
I think that with the situation, people like to say that God rewards or punishes us whatever by our behavior because we're his children. But when you relate that to when they say that, oh, wouldn't you do this with your own children? Wouldn't you try to get them to learn right from wrong, and wouldn't you be willing to punish them if they did something wrong? Humans become adults, but we don't become God. So it doesn't make any sense to say that we're learning how to be a God.
Well, okay,
actually,
but
if you're
I was gonna say
if you're a Mormon,
place or no? I'm
yeah,
sorry.
if you're a Mormon.
Yeah, no, but what I was going to say is, even the Christian position is when we die and go to heaven, then we will understand all those things that we didn't understand. In other words, that this life, even though it's 70, 80 years, is our infancy, if you will, and we're going to live in eternity afterwards, so now we should just do what we're told.
But then we don't need all the lessons we've learned, because so much of the lessons we learned is like what it's necessary to live in this world. Like, so much of the suffering that goes on as a result of people's actions that's supposed to be suffering that we've let into the world, according to Christian theology, it's just totally unnecessary. Like, if God just made people in heaven, none of those lessons would be necessary. But instead, he puts us here. I don't know.
We've got a few more questions on the Q&A. Gregory
Let's shoot
Terrell
that shit.
said a couple things. He said, "Isn't your imagination valuable in terms of morality?" I'm not sure.
I think you need to have some imagination to be able to think of situations you haven't been in, so you can figure out what you think.
I have a pretty
also-
good point for this. Because,
go ahead.
I mean, I've been a role player for like a shit ton of years. Since I was 9, I've played role-playing games. And that has put me in some situations where you actually have to think, what would you do? And that's pretty much where I've derived most of my morals from, like, what I've done in my imagination. So I suppose that's an important part of my moral landscape.
Same here. I mean, I've been into games, Dungeons and Dragons, and all that kind of stuff, and you have to think through certain situations, and yeah, exactly.
See, and when I play games like that, be it a pen and paper role-playing game or a video game, I will generally just put myself in the context of what kind of character is this that I'm playing, like, rather than what kind of morals would I have in this situation. If I'm playing an evil character, I'd be like, what kind of evil thing would this evil person do? Or, someone who's altruistic, what kind of altruistic decision would this person make, rather than what my own morals would be.
Yeah.
And we got another question on the Q&A. Oh, go ahead, Michael, and then we'll...
Well, I was just going to say, if you don't use your imagination, then what do? You just have to commit every single terrible act to realize, oh, that's how I feel about this. I had to murder somebody to I feel bad about murdering people.
S. Ross also asked, how about faith without reason leads to superstition, such as sacrificing virgins to appease the volcano, and reason without faith leads to rationalization, societal pessimism, and so many of the godless totalitarian tragedies of the last century.
What?
Here's what I would say, to go back. Carlton mentioned Hitler earlier, so to throw back to Hitler, Hitler in many speeches related his drive to a divine drive, like, oh, God wants this, like we're God's people and God's people want this, and
people
the idea that only someone who doesn't have religion would do something like that. I mean, that's just patently false. The idea that a lack of faith is what causes someone to...
Religious people are something like 80-90% of America right now, and you can be sure that it's not that 10 to 20% of Americans who are killing and raping and stealing and doing all that evil stuff that's going on in America. So I mean, even if you make the argument that Hitler wasn't religious,
well, just use Stalin then.
Yeah, even if Hitler, Stalin, or whoever was an atheist, like in Hitler's Germany, most of those people were Lutherans or Catholics. And they're the people who are carrying out these fucking mass genocides. So it's in no way going to prevent you from doing terrible things. I mean,
you could argue too, though. You could say, well, let's look at Stalin. Let's say that he was an atheist. Okay, well, regardless, he didn't do anything for his atheist beliefs. He did them for the personal gain and for the public gain, whatever he wanted. That he had plans, what he was planning on doing with Russia at the time. So I think that you can't. There's no book to look to and be like, well, atheists did this because they were atheists. You don't. That doesn't make any sense.
I think though you could, and I don't know where the person's coming from that's asking the question, but I think you could look at it and say, you could look at utilitarian arguments, which are typically non-theistic, and you could take those to a logical extreme where even though you're still serving utilitarianism, that some people might look at the actions that you need to take in its service and say that I still think that's immoral. And the old one I think some of us have heard discussed before was the one about, right, the guy at the railroad track and you got 3 on one track and 1 on the other and blah blah blah. Yeah, and do you pull the switch and kill 3 or kill the one guy in order to save the 3? And it's a numbers game, and most people would say yes, you do. But then you move that scenario into the hospital where you got the 3 guys dying of organ failure, and a guy innocently walks in the hospital who's got just the right organs that you need to save those 3 guys, and then would you go over with a club or a baseball bat and kill him and harvest his organs to save the 3 guys? And most people would then answer no, even though it's still a utilitarian argument. It's still 1 for 3.
I think the difference there is that you're in the trolley problem. You're forced to make the decision. Well, in the hospital, you can choose not to kill the guy.
Well, no, you're not. In the trolley, you're not forced to either. In the trolley, you can sit and do nothing, and the train would simply run over the the three people.
But either choice you make results in someone's death in that problem.
Well, and that's true in the hospital too. I mean, if you do nothing,
but you're
that's the scenario. I mean,
in the
we
hospital
can add to the
situation-
scenario, but it's the same scenario. So if you do nothing, the three guys are going to die.
Radiolab posed the question a little differently when they did theirs. They said you're standing on a bridge and there's a giant fat dude standing next to you, and you could knock him off and save him from. You would kill him, but it would save the other three down the tracks. So it's very similar. But actually, that's a great Radiolab, by the way. Morality. They talk all about that question. And what it is they when they did some, I think it was some MRI scans or something of the brain, they found that a lot of times these questions are hardwired into us. We answer them way too quickly without actually thinking about it.
Right, but I think that was what the person could be pointing to. In other words, that you might take the utilitarian track there and say that I would kill the guy in the emergency room exactly the same because it's a numbers game. It's the most good for the greatest number, the greatest good for the greatest number. But you could still look at that, even as an atheist, I could look at that situation and go, yeah, you're right in the sense that it is the greatest good for the greatest number, and yet B, my sensibility still is that that's an immoral act. And I can't explain it logically, but I feel it.
And therefore, I'm going to go out and mass murder people, right?
No, but I'm just saying. I think his argument is that I think his argument is that even if you take utilitarianism to its extreme, it can still produce results that feel immoral.
Dumbass has got a point to make.
Yeah, I was just thinking. Yeah, I mean, the original question here, though, I think we've gotten a little bit off that. The original question was. I think it's the point, and I think you just take it for granted that reason requires faith in order not to go to extremes, and that may be a false premise right there. I don't think you can take that for granted. Is what the point that I would like to make to that. That if you got reason but not faith, will that necessarily lead to like Stalin or whatever? I don't think so. I think there's something else behind that.
Yeah.
That's not. I don't think it's really about reason without faith.
What's the thing behind it?
Well, there are societal factors, and I don't know exactly why Stalin did what he did. I haven't studied that part of history all that much. But there are a lot of factors behind this, and I don't think you can say that it's just reason without faith.
Mike.
Yeah, I think that it's a weird thing to say that you need faith to temper reason, or else something terrible is going to happen. Because I mean, from my perspective, what you're saying is, it's not enough to have justified reasons to do things. Sometimes you need to add in unjustified beliefs to keep you from doing terrible things. It's like, how does that make sense?
Well, can it though?
Hey guys,
I mean,
you're doing great, making sense with everything you do, but if you don't stop making sense and start believing nonsense for bad reasons, then you're probably going to kill people.
Right, but can't you? But couldn't it, if I took out the word faith and substituted the word compassion?
No.
Compassion
See,
isn't always necessarily logical or utilitarian in its application. So, couldn't I say that reason needs to be tempered by compassion?
These are not diametrically opposed ideas, or mutually exclusive ideas, though. Compassion versus reason.
Yeah, I mean, faith to me is
they are in the sense
behavior.
They are in the sense that faith is unjustified by logic, and I think a lot of times compassion can be unjustified by logic as well.
I don't know. I can justify compassion with logic. I can't justify faith with logic.
There you go.
No, but I think you're saying compassion, and I don't want to argue. But it sounds like you're saying compassion in the general sense, and that you can justify the idea of compassion. But I'm not sure I'm not sure that you could justify every application of compassion can't be justified logically.
Yeah, I think it's possible in theory to justify some compassionate acts, but faith, just as far as I'm concerned, by definition, faith is unjustified, and if you justify it, it's not faith anymore. So
Right. That's reason.
So before we wrap up the conversation, I think we should not miss the chance, since we're talking about morality, secular morality, to take a stab at the Catholic Church for covering up, centuries of child rape. Stop fucking raping kids, God damn it!
You vicars of Christ on earth, please stop fucking children.
You fucking
Yeah, but it
assholes.
doesn't say so in the Bible.
I guess that's true. It doesn't say anywhere you can't rape kids in the Bible.
Yeah.
So
They
gotta
took
get-
time to make sure that you didn't covet your neighbor's ass, but your neighbor's child's ass is apparently up for grabs.
We know about the Jews that you don't have to do anything that the Bible doesn't explicitly deny you from doing. Like pushing a button isn't okay, but if you make it dial the number all the time and
God, fucking automatic phones.
there's many conversations I've been in or seen in the last year where people talk about the new pope and the new pope said this thing, he did this thing that's really nice, and isn't that nice? He's more progressive than the last pope. And even I will have a tendency for a moment to be like, oh yeah, that is kind of nice. That's a great step. And then I think, oh yeah, but he's also complicit in covering up and extending the rape of children. So fuck him and the Catholic Church.
Okay, at the risk of being beaten up here badly though, couldn't you argue?
Get the bats.
What's that? Couldn't you argue? Nobody's arguing that obviously the molesting of children is right, but like any large corporation, if you look at the Catholic Church, I think anybody would have to admit on either side of the fence that there are some things that they do that are good things that they do, charitable works, whatever. And I think, and again, I'm not sure that was the right answer, but I could certainly see the person saying, if we go public with what has happened, then we demolish the entire organization. It falls apart. If we deal with it internally, I mean, it's like any other. It's like a business corporation. A lot of times, somebody may have got caught, mishandling funds or doing something that they really would rather not be public because it's going to damage the rest of the good that they do. So they handle it.
Okay, what I would say to that is this. Okay. Fine. So if you don't want to go public with the goings on, the internal goings on, because it might discredit the church. Well, stop fucking raping kids from here on out. Like, and the assholes that have done it, get fucking rid of them. Excommunicate them. You can excommunicate a woman for trying to be a priest, but if you're a priest that rapes a kid, be like, oh, knock that shit off. We'll put you somewhere else, and hopefully you won't do that again. And sure enough, you fucking will, and then no one does anything about it.
Like, if you're from a church that will excommunicate a rape victim but not her rapist, like that has happened in South America because she needed an abortion to survive. This organization. I mean, it's unlike every other corporation and body in the world because they claim to be the earthly voice for the perfect source of morality, and this is what they do.
Well, it's another thing too is that there's been many times, and it's been exposed that there has been whole groups of priests systematically raping children for years and years and years and years, and the church has done nothing about it, or they've taken those priests and shuffled them around to different places and said, now don't you touch no little kids, and then they go diddle more kids. Right. So you've got these this whole systematic thing going on. I think what you need to do is you need to go in and clean house if you're the Catholic Church. There's ways to do it, and just like Mike said, was it Mike who said this? I forget who said. Yeah, it was Mike who said this. There are the people. No matter what, the people are still going to look up to them, right? Because they are the perfect source of morality. So they're still going to look up to them, regardless of what kind of damage control they have to do. They're still going to be, for their followers, a source for good in the world.
Just to be clear here, we're coming down firmly on the side that diddling little kids is wrong?
Yeah, we're all on the same side there.
No ambiguity there.
No ambiguity there. But it's not unique to the Catholic Church either. As an example, in North Carolina, there was a Baptist church. Where a preacher. No, and this is sadly ironic, but the preacher got caught having an affair with underage girls, and he was removed as the pastor of that church, and actually was arrested. And I'm not sure if there were charges were filed, but I think ultimately they were dropped. But there was no question about whether he did it. It was more a technicality than anything else that they were dropped for. And so he obviously wasn't pastor of that church. He went down the road, I think it was like 15, 25 miles, and with the full knowledge of the second church, because they were in the same denomination, got a job as a youth pastor in the second church. Right, and I'm like...
I'm not sure that, as I recall, I'm not sure that the Baptists have the same system that the Catholics do, where there's not a hierarchy of
infallible.
It doesn't need to be approved by an organization for a person to be.
Which Baptist church?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for a lot of them it is. I mean, there are independent Baptist church, but most of them still do fall under. It may not be as tight a hierarchy as formalized as the Catholic Church, but it's still there. They know.
So we'll wrap up our final thoughts
Yeah,
here. So
sure.
I'll go through the list for everybody. So Mike Bowler, final thoughts.
Oh, I don't think I have any. I think between Michael and Cecil, I mean, I think they made pretty good points there, and everyone else.
Mm-hmm. All right, Michael.
Note to the Catholic Church: if you're going to be diddling children and hiding it, don't leave a fucking paper trail that literally says "Do what's good for the church rather than the people."
Carlton.
Yeah, I got to follow up on that. Nothing. I just basically what we all said. But for me, morals. I get my morals from myself, and I think that's a perfectly valid source. And it doesn't prevent me from pointing out somebody else that I think is doing something immorally, nor does it stop me from trying to stop them. And this is all I got for Christmas.
What? Oh, so it's an Eminem fan. Okay, I couldn't see earlier when you said
Eminem
that.
fan, yeah. It has little M&Ms in here. It's a bit deceitful because the guy on top, well, actually not the red guy, so I shouldn't complain. The yellow guy is a peanut M&M, but they are not peanut M&Ms inside. Okay.
All right, Arno, final thoughts.
I get my morals from Batman. And that's why I wear latex and go beating up people during Wednesdays.
That's a very strange answer, Mr. Mortimer.
And a penis on your T-shirt. Cecil, hit us with some final thoughts.
Gosh, final thoughts. I think one way they could cut down on the Catholic Church, one way they could cut down the priest stealing the children is if they, instead of wearing robes, they wore capes. That way they couldn't fit the children underneath there. They would just, they would be exposed, and you would see the child latched onto his genitals. So I think that would, be a good way. Just change the outfit.
You'd at least have more creative priests that way. They'd have to find a better way to do it, like hide.
And big organizations change outfits all the time. They change their logos and outfits, and I don't think it would be that big to roll that out. I do want to say too, thanks to anybody who listens, and if you don't listen to my show, go fuck yourself. But anybody else who listens, thank you very much for the support.
Dumbass, your thoughts.
Well, I guess I'd just like to reiterate that morals shouldn't be something that's just really easy, something that you can point to a book and say, this is the way it is. It should be something that a lot of the time that you have to agonize over, and it needs to be difficult. It needs to be something that you really think about and constantly question yourself about. Am I being moral? Is this the right thing? I think that's the right, proper way to do it. That's the way we all need to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Brandy, final thoughts?
I agree. Dumbass. Very well put. Basically, I think, of course, that we don't need a book to tell us. We don't need an external authority to tell us what our morals should be. It's worth painting over, thinking over, considering the consequences of things, and certainly it's the same process that faithful people go through. They just don't realize it. They think they refer to the book, but actually, if they're doing it right, they think it over and consider what's worth following and what's worth doing and what's not. So that's it.
Here.
And my final thoughts are to go back once again to the Catholic Church and stop fucking raping kids. That's all I have to say to that. So some of us...
very simple. I don't know.
It does. It seems so simple. It's like, okay, here's kids. Do we rape them? No, let's not do that. Okay, there you go. Moving forward, stop fucking raping kids.
I don't think that's what Jesus meant when he said, "Come unto me, all the little children."
Oh my fucking God. Okay, now that we're at the end, I remember the news story about a court case where the lawyer for the church was in front of a bunch of sexual assault victims of the church and quoted that verse of the Bible to them.
No, you couldn't make
that fucking verse.
You could not.
And they stormed out in protest.
So those of us here that have a weekly podcast or bi-weekly, however often, I'm going to go through real quick. And Mike Bowler, you have your own podcast, Skeptics Guide to Conspiracy, and you're on the Bitch Spot Report. What's coming up on your podcast?
Okay, I just finished a year-end kind of looking at some of the conspiracy, like Sandy Hook, all the craziness there, and I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do for the next one. It's probably I'd like to start the 9/11 right away because it's looking like it's gonna be a multi-part extravaganza.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, actually, I'm hoping to have someone on toward the end of that. Hint, hint, wink, wink.
I will be prepared, sir.
Okay.
All right, Dumbass, what do you got coming up next?
Well, it's basically the same kind of stuff. I've got some things planned, but I haven't been able to get around to them. I've been going through some very tough personal times in my life right now, so some things have gone on hold. But I'm planning to put some stuff out there really soon, and it's the same stuff I was talking about before, so you know what's coming up.
Excellent. And Cecil, if it weren't for cognitive dissonance, we probably all wouldn't be here together today doing this thing. It's the good. We all came from the god awful hard to pronounce Google Plus community that we branded.
Yeah, ICD, renamed, yeah.
On our old Hangouts, I used to try and say that every time, and usually got it right. So, so on cognitive dissonance, what's coming up next? Anything in particular?
Well, the next show, we end the show with two lists that came from Right Wing Watch. One was the 10 worst anti-LGBT stories of the year, and the other one was the 8 worst xenophobic leaders, and that was fun to do. The show should be out Monday. We're also hopefully in the future going to have Tanner Campbell from Secular Programming and Secular Broadcasting on to talk about a brand new thing called Secular.fm, and this is 24-hour broadcasting. We're part of it, so if you guys go to Secular.fm, you can listen to our show along with, I think right now it's 11 other shows. And they're broadcasting 24 hours a day. It's in beta right now, but he's adding things as time goes on, so the site's gonna hopefully be a little more robust. But we're gonna have him on to talk about it in a couple weeks too.
Very cool.
Oh, I should also mention that the Amateur Skeptics is going to be putting up their 100th episode soon. I won't be specifically in the discussion on that one, but I'm planning to add a little something to it. So
excellent. And the Irreverent Skeptics podcast is coming along. Our website, irreverentskeptics.com, will have a new theme probably next week, so it'll look a little more presentable for our podcast. We should have content starting to populate there very shortly, and episodes available to download before long, and we'll be on iTunes and Stitcher shortly.
Awesome.
You can go back through all the history of our Hangouts, the video cast. There's links there. Or you can also look on my YouTube channel for my Google Plus profile.
And for fan mail and death threats, where can they reach us?
Oh yeah, that's right. Feedback at irreverentskeptics.com. Send us any feedback. Tell me to go fuck myself. I'll tell you to go fuck yourself back on here.
Why is go fuck yourself an insult? I mean, you're just telling somebody to go do something pleasurable.
Well, I could just tell them I probably did a half hour ago. So yeah, you know.
Don't mind if I do. Yeah.
This email says go fuck yourself. I'll be right back.
I will see myself out.
Andrew.